Welcome to this student-made After Effects tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about masking and rotoscoping. Masking and rotoscoping are both amazing features in After Effects, whatever version you have, and so we're going to be looking at those today. So here we're looking at a clip from a recent film that I did the visual effects for and also was the director of. And here we have this person who's looking at a hologram, but they have to pass in front of that hologram. Now, although there's many effects in here, the one that we're really looking at is how this person is rotoscoped. So see how it appears as if the reminder's hologram is behind this person? Well, that doesn't happen naturally. You have to either mask that person out or rotoscope them out. So here, if we turn off, this is our rotoscoped layer. If we turn that off, we hide it. You can see it looks like the hologram is in front of him and behind him at the same time, and it just looks really bad. So we had to rotoscope him out in order to put the hologram behind him. And that's not all that difficult to do. So in this tutorial, we'll be talking about rotoscoping and masking. I did this using rotoscoping. You can see that here. So I rotoscoped his body. But you can also do that with masking, although it takes a little bit longer. Here's another example of when masking is really useful. We'll come over to this example, where this person is shooting a gun. And you can see it looks like she's lighting up from that gun going off. Of course, there wasn't actually a gun going off, so she wasn't actually lighting up, but we did that using masking. And so you can see I masked out areas where I wanted there to be light, areas where I thought light would occur. Here we can hide that layer if she was actually shooting a gun. And so now you can see that that adds a lot of realism to our shot. Very cool. Alright, so let's hop into a new project and I'll show you how to mask and rotoscope. Okay, so we have our new project here. We got nothing on our composition, nothing imported, and no layers. So what I'll do right now is I'll take this footage and just drag it over here to import it. You can see it's importing, and now we have that footage in here. Fantastic. So I'll take this footage that we have, I'll bring it down into our masking composition, and now you can see that we have this footage in here. Okay, it's a gunfight scene. And so what you'll notice is that this footage layer is really short when looking at the whole composition, and it's kind of out of whack. So what we'll actually do is we'll take our work area and bring that down so that we don't have all this wasted space. And so if you scale that work area down, or using the short keys B for beginning of work area and N for end of work area, B and N, you can take that, trim your work area down, right click in this area here, and then trim comp to work area. And so now our comp is just that size of our work area, so that's a lot more pleasant to deal with. So now we can see we're rendering this out, and then we'll just look at that, and we can see our footage there. Very cool. And so now you can see that this person is firing a gun. Here, we'll trim our work area again. This person's firing a gun, but it doesn't look very realistic at this point because you can't see any muzzle flares and you have no real indication that the gun's actually going off. So what we want to do is we want to add a flash, just like in that other clip, where it looks like this person's being lit up because of the gun that they're shooting. So what we'll do is we'll create a new adjustment layer. So I'll right click here, say new adjustment layer. You can also do that by coming into layer, new adjustment layer. And what we'll do is we'll take this adjustment layer and we'll trim it down to just 1 or maybe 2 frames. You just take that, we'll trim it down. You can see that's nothing, and that's about 2 frames. We'll come down here, we'll scale this up so we can see this a little bit better. And then we'll take our playhead and find a location right where we think the flare should go off, the flash. So I think right about there. We'll take this and we'll move that into position. You can see that this is 1, 2, 3 frames long. We'll trim that down to 2 frames. 2 frames. And now we have this adjustment layer and we have our footage. This adjustment layer right now is not doing anything. Adjustment layers are just clear layers that you can apply effects to. And right now it doesn't have any effects. But we're going to change that. What we're going to do is we're coming over to our effects and presets, and we're going to grab the exposure color correction exposure preset. We're going to drag that right onto our layer. So now it switched our panels here from project over to effects controls, and we'll rename this layer real quick to flash. Highlight the layer, press enter, and then you can type the name. And so now we have this exposure layer. So you can see we can really brighten up the scene, and we can really darken down the scene. But what we want to do is add about one stop of light. Okay, but you can see this one stop of light, if we turn our flash layer off, this adjustment layer, it applies to the whole picture, and we just want it to apply only to the footage layer. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our masking tool. So you want to highlight our flash layer, our adjustment layer, and grab this masked pen tool, also the shortcut G. And so we'll figure out where we think the light would be hitting if a gun was actually going off. So I think it'd probably be on his arm here. You can click to create a mask. Oops. And then if you hold down and pull it a little bit, you can create rounded masks. You see that? So you can create rounded masks if you hold it down. And so I think it'd be coming around right about in here. And then you can get as detailed as you want depending on how much time you have. Oops. For the sake of this tutorial, oops, keep messing up here. Control Z is your friend. For the sake of this tutorial, I will just go kind of quickly. So you can roll the mouse button to zoom in and zoom out like I'm doing here. And then you can press down and hold down on the space bar in order to move around your image. So now we created this mask, and you can see, here if I fit the screen here, you can see that it looks pretty good. It's only covering up that area. Let's create another mask. So we'll come up here, and just while we still have this flash layer selected, we'll create another mask, because I think it'd kind of light up his face here as well. Maybe we'll come kind of across here because there won't be a sharp edge. So we'll light up his face a little bit, maybe light up his shoulder there a little bit. So now we have our mask, but look at this. Look at those lines. It doesn't look very realistic at this point. It looks pretty fake, actually. So we'll come down here into our flash layer. We'll drop down the properties, go into our masks, and you can see we have mask 1, 2, and 3. So now we'll highlight all 3 of those masks and press F for feather. That's the mask feather. So if we feather this way out, well, feather it out maybe that much, you can see that the edges are very reduced, but that's a little bit too much of a feather. We'll feather it down to, say, 10 pixels. Maybe a little bit more. You can kind of see we have a harsh line, especially right there. So we'll feather these out to maybe 15 pixels. And then those ones are looking pretty good. This one's still not looking great, so we'll take this last one and we'll just feather that one out a fair amount more. Maybe not quite that much. So now you can see it's a subtle change, but it adds a lot to the scene. And so now when we play through this, you can see it flashes only in those areas as he shoots the gun. And now I don't think a flash would actually last 2 frames. So why did I make that layer 2 frames long? Well, what we're going to do is we'll come in here and we'll press T for opacity. And now we'll start the keyframe at the beginning of this layer, and then we'll come to the end of the layer and keyframe it to 0. So that means on the middle frame, our opacity is going to be at 50%. 100%, 50%, 0. So it kind of is a flash that very quickly fades. You can see it's still kind of there. And so I like how that looks. Now you can do a lot more to this and you could spend a lot more time. But we don't really need to do that right now because that looks really pretty good. So what you can do from there is you can duplicate this layer everywhere you need to. So we'll come back in here and we'll minimize these properties and we'll press Control D or Command D on a Mac. And you can see it creates all of these layers that we can just reposition anywhere we want. But now there's one thing to note is that the masks are in the exact same position on the screen as they were previously. So if your subject hasn't moved that much, maybe you can just kind of line those back up again, and it'll still look okay. But if your subject is moving a whole lot, then you might have to come in here and either delete these masks or grab your pen tool again and individually change each point so that it works better. But we don't really need to do that right now. Okay, and so there's our mask, and then we could continue doing that on for however long we please. But you can see it adds a whole lot to the scene. Okay, so that's about it for what we have in masking. The one other thing I'll show you about masking is that there are different types. And so to show you that, we'll jump onto a new composition here. So I'll say, make a new composition, create a new composition with that button right there. Comp 1 will say masking 2. And so now we have a new layer. So in here we'll do create new solid. We'll say make the comp size, and we'll have it be white solid. Then we'll do layer new solid, make comp size, and we'll have it be black. And so now what we can do is we have the white layer, white solid on black, and the white solid on top and the black solid on bottom. And now we can, while we have the white solid selected, that's very important, you can select the masking tool, and you can't see that mask all that great, but we can create a mask. And you can see that even though this white layer is on top, that mask only took what was inside of that circle. And see, now you can change this property. So here it's on add, it's adding whatever's inside here, whatever is inside that mask. You can set it to subtract, so it's subtracting all of the white that was inside of here, and it's only having white on the outside, and it shows the black that's underneath. Or you can also set it to a number of other things. One other property I'll show you there is we'll select that again, and we'll create a separate mask. And then this second one is still set to add, so you can see it's adding the white. But you can also set it to intersect. And so you can see where there's that intersection, and you might have to play around with this a little bit to really understand what's going on. If you set them both to intersect, then in that area where they're intersecting, they show the white, which is what their mask is applied to. If you set one of them to intersect and the other one to subtract, then this one is subtracting, and this one is only adding for right now. So it's a little complicated, just play around with it and you'll be able to figure it out really pretty easily. Okay, well that's about all we have for masking. Now we'll jump into rotoscoping, which is one of the coolest features in After Effects. Okay, so here we are, and we're going to look at some rotoscoping. And so I just opened up a new composition, and I already imported this footage layer. And that's the only thing we have right here, and this footage has no effects applied to it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do some rotoscoping. So we have this person here who's sleeping on this bed, which is actually a table. And what we want to do for the sake of this tutorial is have some text come out from behind their head, or make it look like it's coming out from behind their head. So what we want eventually to happen is have this text, and this isn't the prettiest text, but we want this text to start out behind their head and then slowly come out to this side. But we want to make it look like it's actually coming out behind their head, so there's a sharp line right here. Now you could do this with masking, but you'd have to keyframe the position of the mask, which takes a long time having to move each point. So what we're going to do is rotoscope. So I'll turn this text layer off right now, and we have our mask here. We have our footage layer here. And so we'll pick the area where we need to rotoscope. So I think we need to rotoscope from about here, this 10-second mark, to about, say, here, this 15-second mark. Okay, so what we're going to do is at this point in time, we're going to duplicate this layer by pressing Control-D. So now this layer is duplicated. And then what we're going to do is press Control-Shift-D, or come up to Edit, Split Layer. Here's Duplicate and Split. And what that does is it duplicates the layer essentially, but it splits it at that point. So what we can do is we can delete that side, so we only have from that point on. And then we'll come here to where we want to stop rotoscoping, just say right about here. And here we'll press Control-Shift-D again and split the layer. And so now we have our footage layer as well as a duplicated portion of just that size. Okay? And so now we're going to take this part here and we're going to first rename it and call it Roto. And then this one we'll just rename and call it Footage. Okay, and so now we'll take our Roto and we'll come up here to our Rotoscope tool, Roto Brush, and then we'll just double click with this Roto Brush highlighted. We'll just double click right there. Now you can see that changed a little bit. It brings us into our panel that is only looking at this layer, and it gives us this green icon. What we're going to do now is we can just trace this person or whatever you want to rotoscope. Oops, you can see this pink area. It highlighted the whole thing. So it highlighted too much. What we're going to do is hold Alt to delete some stuff, and we're going to come in here with our red brush and just trim that down. Okay, so it's a little too close on the edges there. So we'll just come back in and make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so now you can be as exact as you have time for, as I always say, but that looks pretty good. So now we'll press Control right arrow, keep pressing Control right arrow to kind of scrub through our footage. And you can see this rotoscope is really great in that it is intelligently figuring out where our person is, or where whatever your object is. And so you can see it's encroaching there a little bit. You always want to try and catch it wherever you can. That was kind of bad. I just want it to come out a little bit. So I roll my mouse arrow to zoom in. Roll my mouse. And so now we're just kind of watching this, make sure we don't have any errors. I'm sure there's plenty of errors, but we're going kind of quick here. And then we just want to go to the end of where we need to rotoscope. And so now you can see why you don't want to rotoscope any more than you have to. So if you have a situation and you only need to rotoscope the person for a set amount of time, create your roto layer only that length and time. So then you save yourself some work, which is always good. And so now that's the end of that layer. Perfect. So we rotoscoped all that we needed to. So now we'll come back into our composition panel, and we can see that it doesn't look like there's any change yet. We'll bring our text layer back, and you can see that even if we select our text layer and move it, nothing has changed yet. But if we take this roto layer and move it above our text layer, now we're getting somewhere, and now our text disappears when it's behind his head. And so what we can do is take our text layer, and it doesn't quite fit behind his head, so we'll maybe just shrink it down a little bit. You can, oops, we'll just shrink it down from this side a little bit. Okay, so now we can just do a simple animation and keyframe. Okay, so now we can just come down here, press P for position, and then just do a simple position keyframe. So we'll just click on our little keyframe there, and we'll create 2 keyframes for our position. So now as we scrub back and forth, we'll move this in a little bit so we don't have problems there. And see, what happens is as soon as our rotoscope ends, the text shows up again. So what we'll do is we'll just zoom in a little bit. We'll pull this text layer in, then we'll zoom in, and we can, each one of these boxes here is a frame. So you can really get down to frame by frame work there. And so now, if we do B for beginning and N for end of our work area, and then you can press 0 on your numpad, we can see that text looks like it's coming out from behind our fellow's head. Very cool. So now a few final words about keyframes is if you select your keyframes and press F9 or go keyframe assistant easy ease, also F9. That changes your keyframes so that it's a smoother transition. It goes faster at the beginning, kind of peaks in the middle, and then it slows down again as it gets there. So instead of just being a linear progression, instead of just going at the same speed all the time, it actually speeds up when it starts and slows down as it finishes. And just looks nice and smooth. Okay, and one final thing about this is you can see it looks a little jittery as it's coming out. It's kind of weird to look at. What we'll do is we'll turn on motion blur. You may have to toggle switches and modes depending on what this looks like. But we'll click motion blur on our layer, and then we'll also enable motion blur for the comp. And then that should make it look a little smoother. There we go. And so that is how you rotoscope and mask with your text. There's a whole lot more to learn about this, so I suggest you play around a little bit, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it more in the future. Okay, so that's how you use rotoscoping to make a hologram like this look like it's behind a person. If this tutorial helped you out, make sure you click that like button. It really helps me out. And subscribe to the channel to learn a lot more of these fun student-run tutorials. Okay, so thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for our next tutorial, which is going to be about 3D tracking as well as 3D text, which is how I got this hologram board to make it look like it was sitting on top of that dresser, even though it's really not. Okay, thanks for watching. This has been Kastan.day with another student-made After Effects tutorial.